Hello, everyone. Welcome. Good evening. Good afternoon. My name is Sanjay Sarma. I am Vice President for Open Learning, and it is my great pleasure and honor to invite you to this wonderful event and celebration. You know, when OpenCourseware was launched in 2001, it was a defining moment. This was not as obvious as it seems now. And one of the great things about a place like MIT and OpenCourseware royalty like Hal Abelson is that they normalize something well before its time. And I remember when Hal started articulating this thought, it seemed so foreign, it seemed so weird. Just give stuff away for free, isn't this what makes MIT essential? And the argument was no, it's not. What makes MIT special is all the other stuff, all the magic that you can see in the campus. But the content, my God, let's share it with the world. So that was how OpenCourseware was launched in 2001, and along with Creative Commons and the Internet Archive and Wikipedia and other entities, it has created an ethos for open sharing which endures to this day. And today, OpenCourseware is central to the way MIT approaches a lot of what we do. We think open first. And it will continue to shape, although the space is getting crowded, that ethos. Precisely what the next step is in this is an unknown. We will define it collectively. But a giant step was taken in that direction by the current leadership, Kurt Newton, and Krishna Rajagopal, Professor Krishna Rajagopal, good friend, who was Dean for Digital Learning and now is the chair of the OpenCourseware Faculty Advisory Committee when we launched NextGen OpenCourseware. So it is with great pleasure and honor that I introduce Kurt to kick the event off, and thank you all for coming, and really wonderful to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Sanjay. Hello, everyone, and a special welcome to our live stream audience. Before I begin, I wanted to invite people to join in the conversation that we're going to be having this hour. You can go to the Q&A function on slido.com and go to the event MIT-OCW, or sample that QR code, and that should take you right to the site. And as we get into some Q&A at the end of the session, we'll be watching those questions, and we'll be able to give voice to a few of them. So I want to kick us off here with a few reflections on some high points that have brought us to this moment with OpenCourseware and open knowledge sharing. You know, we're just finishing our 20th anniversary year, and most people know of OCW fundamentally as this website containing materials from across the entire MIT curriculum, from STEM subjects like linear algebra through amazing teaching that's going on in the moment in, say, social sciences and humanities, such as Black Feminist Health Science Studies, one of our most recent publications. Across those 2,500 courses, OCW has been changing and evolving to keep up with the times. We're doing way more video now than we did in our first few years. We've been doing, to complement the what is taught at MIT through those course materials, the how and why teaching happens through some Instructor Insights interviews, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a bit, and increasingly student contributions to complement what faculty are sharing through OCW as well. And it's not just the website that OCW is providing the world. Some people come straight to the website, but increasingly our reach and our impact is through some of these other channels. You know, many people find out about OCW through, for instance, Google search and deep linking to individual, say, lecture files within OCW. Our YouTube channel, now with over 3.8 million subscribers, is the largest subscriber base for any .edu on YouTube. We've got the Chalk Radio podcast, carrying those Instructor Insights interviews so you can listen to OCW while you're cooking dinner, commuting, what have you. You know, take it with you wherever you go. And because OCW material is Creative Commons licensed, We have colleagues around the world who are making use of this material. For instance, our friends at LibreTexts, who are taking lecture notes from OCW sites and creating these wonderful online textbook, rich online textbook resources from it. OCW's reach truly global, with over 2/3 of our traffic coming from outside North America and extended, especially in Africa and Southeast Asia, with this Mirror Drive program that puts all OCW content on a hard drive to be installed typically on, say, college campuses. Over OCW's 20-year lifespan, we've reached over 500 million, that's billion with a B, learners. Many of those come straight to the OCW website, but there's also this great multiplier effect, especially from educators making use of those materials, using them with, in many cases, hundreds of students. Per month, 2 million visits to the website and 5 million views of our YouTube videos. Who are our users? It's a really interesting split between, people in an educational institution, many students, and that very powerful, impactful, set of educators as well. But almost half of our users are independent learners. They're just curious. They're trying to keep up with their fields. I think one of the pleasant surprises from the experience with OCW is how many curious independent learners there are who continue to want to learn. We've heard from thousands of users, over our years, and here's just a couple highlighting the difference that OCW is making in their lives. COVID was not the first educational disruption people have been facing. Tuba, college student in Pakistan, told us about how OCW allowed her to continue her studies when it was not safe for her to leave home to get to school. On the other hand, we've got independent learners like Trent Parker, who in the space of just a few months learned enough about how to program that he was able to get a job at Google. Not everybody's going to move that quickly, but it shows what you can do with all those online resources. A big part of what we want to do today is recognize the contributions that MIT faculty have been making and how important the educator use of these materials is. With our Instructor Insights interviews, we've opened up conversations between MIT educators and their colleagues around the world, talking about how and why they teach the way they do. We're sharing these insights in videos, in web page form, and again, through that Chalk Radio podcast. And it's a very important direction that we are very excited to be continuing to develop in the future. We've got 2,300, I believe, more than 2,300, faculty and instructor contributors. I want to highlight and give a special appreciation to these 47 faculty who have published more than 10 times with OCW. It just expresses the depth of commitment around the campus, and we're so grateful for your contributions. And in particular, I just want to highlight one person, Professor Gill Stang, and we're delighted to have him in the audience here today. His versions of linear algebra, starting with the version in 2002 that was part of our first 50-course pilot, up through the 2020 vision for linear algebra, talking about how it's so important in machine learning, have collectively garnered 13.5 million visits. I think it's safe to say there might be no MIT faculty shared through OCW who's more beloved by our users than Professor Stang, and so we're so grateful for you. So I'm going to move quickly to a quick demo of the new site, but those of you who have just joined the live stream, want to invite you to put in your questions at slido.com, MIT-OCW, the event. So, highlight 3 things about the new OCW site. First, it's dramatically cleaned up, opened up, modernized, and it's mobile responsive. So when you shrink the size of the screen, when you shrink the size of the screen, the things on the site, collapse, they behave yourselves. Much more useful for especially the many people around the world for whom a phone is their only digital device. The courses that you've known and loved are still here with that cleaned up interface. and again, mobile responsive. We've also invested in a brand new content discovery experience. So when you go to, for instance, a general term like energy, you can filter that result by, for instance, I want to see social sciences. And really want to start with some lecture videos. And I want to see the most recent stuff that you've published. You can see that this really nimble, flexible content discovery experience is going to make it easier for people to access and make use of the many thousands of courses that we have reflected on OCW. So I want to encourage you now to go pull out your phones and go on your browser to ocw.mit.edu. And having done so, to keep it fresh and easily accessible, it's really easy to add a little icon for the OCW website onto your phone. Here's the instructions for iPhone on the left and Android on the right. Click Add to Home Screen, and you'll get that lovely MIT OCW logo. Thank you, and I hope you continue to make great use of what we've got on OCW. With that, I'll hand it over to Krishna.
Thank you, Kurt, and thank you, Sanjay. So I'm Krishna Rajagopal, professor of physics at MIT and chair of the OCW Faculty Advisory Committee. I see Hal in the room, who has been a member of the advisory committee for much longer than I have. I see members of the advisory committee. There's Anjali there, and there's Nancy there, who are going to be joining the panel in a minute. My first responsibility here is on behalf of really all of the faculty at MIT, but certainly those of us on the advisory committee, is to say some thank yous. The achievement that we're celebrating here is a 20-year achievement of many, many people. But first and foremost, I want to thank the OCW team themselves, who are shown on the slide. They and their predecessors have implemented the remarkable vision that Hal and his colleagues had 20 years ago in a way that has had an amazing impact that Kurt has just described for you. I'm not going to walk through and name all of the 20 people whose photos you see here, but I will mention Eliz de Rienzo, who's in the top left on the image. Eliz, where are you? There she is, right there in the middle. Eliz is the one member of the team who has been here for the full 20 years. So she has been with OCW from day one. So thank you from all of us to all of you. Thank you also to 2,300 faculty and instructors, whom Kurt already mentioned, who have shared their teaching, their pedagogy, their knowledge openly with the world. 9,000 people who have shared little individual nuggets of IP. And the remainder of my remarks, I'm going to pivot and talk about the next generation platform and program. Here I want to thank Open Learning Engineering, Peter Pinch, in particular, Peter Pinch, Ferdy Alamadi, and Daniel Seaton, but the whole engineering team, the platform that Kurt just gave you the brief demo for, there's an enormous amount of work by that team behind it, and so thank you to them also. And last of all of Open Learning. For 10 years now, so for the second decade of its history, OCW has been part of MIT Open Learning. This is a great collaborative environment, amazing people doing amazing things. OCW is just one part of it, but one of its characteristics is that everyone helps everyone. I see Emma in the back, who from the Open Learning team, who has helped us today, MIT Video Productions, many people I see Chris Babel. Thank you to all of Open Learning, again, from all the faculty who had the 2,300 faculty, lecturers, and instructors who have shared their perspectives with the world in this way. So Kurt already showed you the NextGen platform, and you can see motivations for it in the way that it looks. And Kurt and I and many others have been working on this for about 2-3 years now. Half the motivation came from what you just saw from Kurt, which is to say creating a better user experience for the millions of people who use the platform. I want to speak in the next few minutes about the other half of the motivation, which is we want to share a vibrant reflection of MIT teaching and learning. And those words have been sort of a mantra for the last few years, and they have multiple meanings. First of all, one of the essence of OCW from a faculty point of view is that you teach your class, it's the end of the semester, and OCW offers the opportunity to share what you've already created. And that was true 20 years ago when Eliz came to your office and what you had created was on sheets of paper, and Eliz left your office with a folder full of sheets of paper, and then Eliz and the team worked on sharing the knowledge that was encoded in those sheets of paper. It's true today, except it's not sheets of paper anymore. So the philosophy is the same, but the artifacts of our teaching have changed. And on this slide is an example for faculty who are using the residential MITx platform to teach these days. OCW now publishes content like that on Open Learning Library. This next slide is another example. It would never have occurred to a faculty member at MIT 20 years ago to create a website as a part of their teaching. It's done across MIT, sprinkled throughout MIT now. There are people who, on their own, as a part of their teaching activity, decide, I'm going to create a website where I will reach out to the world as a part of my teaching. This is an example from during the pandemic from 2020 or 2021. Do you remember? 2020 or 2021, Kurt? I can't remember. I think it's fall of 2021. The biology department taught a course on COVID and the pandemic, and they created the website that you see on the right. It's a great website. Biology department's maintaining it. What OCW then does is to point to it. So there's 200 million people who have come to the OCW website. They will now, when they're using that new search and discovery experience, if they type in COVID, they will be led to the website that the biology department is maintaining, sharing the pedagogy from this course. So the message, again, to the faculty who are here is that OCW is here to share the things that you create in the act of teaching at MIT. As what you create changes over time, OCW will change in ways that reflect that. My last slide, the strategy for this next generation for OCW is partly about a new platform, and it's partly about the program. On the platform side, I've already mentioned the user experience. Kurt showed you a demo. But if you think about the phrase, which I had here, vibrant reflection of MIT teaching and learning, there's one aspect of this where I think we collectively have fallen down over the past decade, and that is that if you ask me, of the 2,600 courses on OCW, what's their average age? The answer is 12 years. And that's too old. If we want to show off a vibrant and current reflection of how we teach, what we're teaching, current perspectives, the content coming from the classroom of today, of MIT today, that should be, the average age maybe should be more like 5 years instead of 12 years. And the reason why it was 12 years is that the old platform was too rigid, too inflexible, and it was much too much work and effort for the team to create new sites. And so a big part of the motivation for the next generation platform was the behind the scenes part of it, to allow the team to have a much more streamlined workflow, much more flexibility. And so the message to faculty today is that the team is ready for you. We want to show off a vibrant and current reflection of MIT teaching and learning. And in fact, Kurt and I, over the past 6 months, have visited basically every department at MIT and every section at MIT, met with faculty, and shared the message that this new platform is coming. Well, now it's here. People are creating materials now on Canvas. We're ready to move materials from your Canvas site to the OCW staging area, where the OCW team can take those materials and share them in a much more streamlined and efficient workflow, so that we collectively, the instructors of MIT working with the OCW team, can offer the world a vibrant and current reflection of what we teach here and how we teach it. So the new platform will enable this rejuvenated program. The last thing I'll mention in the last bullet, 20 years ago, when Hal and his colleagues, including then President Chuck Vest, spoke about OCW, the word that they used was access. We want to offer open access to teaching materials from MIT. And I think we can, all of us, we'll do the applause in a second, but I think we can applaud the OCW team and give them an A+ for 20 years of offering access to teaching materials from MIT, maybe A++. But today we talk about equity, and equity is a higher goal than access. If we speak about educational equity, we, teachers of MIT, we need to acknowledge that we're teaching MIT students. The materials we create are designed for MIT students, and there are large populations out there in the world that don't have the prior educational attainment to learn from those materials. So how can we help them with their education? I think the wrong answer would be for us to say, well, let's prepare new materials for example, community college students. That would be, for us as MIT faculty, an extraordinary statement of hubris. What do I know about teaching physics to community college students? I've never done that in my life. I've learned how to teach physics to MIT students. So that's not the plan. The plan is to collaborate with others out there who do know how to teach community college students or communities all around the world, their communities. And there are people out there in the world building open educational resources of their own, and we should and will collaborate with them so that what people will find in the future is a networked, linked set of open educational resources. So you might start with material produced elsewhere and be led into OCW. If you come to OCW, you might find pointers to material from elsewhere, which will serve to help prepare you and bring you in. We need to build those cross-links, and that means we need to collaborate with others out there, and that's the OCW perspective on educational equity looking ahead to its third decade. Before we applaud the OCW team, actually let's pause and applaud the OCW team, and then I will introduce our keynote. So it's now my honor and pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker for the day, Anya Kamenetz. Anya is a journalist and author, and she's a futurist with a passion for the complexities of how we learn, how we work, and how we live in a rapidly changing world. She thinks, writes, and today speaks about learning and the future. Anya is an award-winning correspondent at NPR, where she coordinates NPR's education coverage both online and on air. She has covered technology, innovation, sustainability, and social entrepreneurship for NPR, but also for Fast Company, The Guardian, New York Magazine, The New York Times, Oprah's O Magazine, Slate, The Village Voice, Wired, The Washington Post, and more. And she has received the National Award for Education Reporting 3 times, won an Edward R. Murrow Award for Innovation in 2017, and she won the 2022 AERA Excellence in Media Reporting on Education Research Award. In addition to her reporting, she's the author of 5 books, starting in 2006 with Generation Debt, which was prescient as well as thoughtful, as is characteristic of all of her work. In 2010, she followed that up with her second book, DIYU, Edupunks, Edupreneurs, and the Coming Transformation of Higher Education, which was and is, in fact, a provocative and, again, prescient take on the challenge of what we here at MIT would refer to as opening learning. After writing books on the uses and misuses of standardized testing and of screen time, her most recent work, a book that will appear this August, we learned at lunch today, is The Stolen Year, How COVID Changed Children's Lives and Where We Go Now. It's an unflinching look at the impact of COVID-19 on children, showing how the last true social safety net, namely the public school system, was decimated by the pandemic, but really by the pandemic following years of short-sighted political decisions. Anya has covered learning, technology, and educational transformation for 2 decades with a sense of empathy and a sense of humor. So please join me in welcoming Anya Kamenetz.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining, and thanks to those who are joining online. This is a huge honor for me to be in conversation with you all. It's very personal for me. You know, this is really something that I'm being asked to reflect on that was a major part of my education and my career as I went along as someone in a weird niche, let's be honest, like an educational journalist. Journalism is not something that's well respected within the fonts of education. You guys have your own ways of constructing knowledge, and I respect that very much. And in the world of journalism, education is barely considered a beat. It's really not that important to people. But I was able to, for the last 2 decades, construct this life covering education. And because I got to know and understand what was happening in this strange frontier world of education, technology, innovation, I had such a good time, and it was so exciting and interesting. And I felt welcomed by the academic community, even though I had no credentials besides a BA. And I felt like in the, in the world of the media, people were somehow paying attention to these topics that I found so interesting. So it's been really great for me. And I've just been reflecting on how the people in this room, some people in this room, open courseware has just always been there. It's always been a fact of life. It's always been a function of the university. It's just there like the library. You know that you can go and turn on the tap and get world-class knowledge, information ready for you when you're ready for it. And then there are people in this room for whom you remember when OpenCourseWare was just the germ of an idea, right? Just the beginning of some strange notion. And then there are people in here for whom it's their life's work and what they do every day and why they get up. So those are amazing perspectives that are coming together in this moment. And what I'm offering is a little bit of a memory of when OpenCourseWare was not brand new, but part of something that was emerging, and people really thought that it could change a lot. They thought that it could change everything. They thought it could change the nature of the university. They thought it could change what education was. And I want to take us back to that moment because I want to talk about what the possibilities are, what they were then, what changed, and where we could go now. Could we get some kind of inspiration from that moment? So I'm really talking about so this is my background. The introduction was very long, I'm sorry. But basically I was out of college and I started covering the millennial generation and their defining characteristics being sort of a lack of economic opportunity and mounting student debt. And so then I was traveling around the country and talking to college students about their debt and also about how higher ed wasn't really working for them, how it wasn't meeting their expectations and their needs in terms of relevance and access, as well as cost. And so from that vantage point, and also with a constant interest in kind of what was emerging in the internet revolution of the time, 2002, 2004, that's when I started working on DIYU and really lucked into the beginning of this conversation at the time, which was the beginning of broadband, the beginning of video, and the beginning of OpenCourseWare, which MIT had inaugurated with its open licensing, with the Creative Commons and open licensing in making something that would be potentially totally new. And so between 2002, 2008, 2009, I did the book DIYU. I also did this project, the EduPunk's Guide, which was about how you could use free and open learning resources to get a DIY credential, potentially. I was interested in that aspect of it. And then I worked with the Mozilla Foundation on the Learning Freedom in the Web Festival in 2009, which brought together people from lots of different corners of the open world and the open learning world. There was a hacker bus, there was a mesh Wi-Fi network. There were people doing kinds of experiments with learning and sort of in open source badges and all kinds of things like that. So we did an interactive book together with that. It was a really fun, cool time. And there were so many different aspects of this that people were really wondering, can we get people to own their own domains? Should that be part of how you qualify for a degree? Can people kind of bypass the whole system and not have to go to graduate school or not have to go to undergraduate school? Can we reclaim how we do learning and pedagogy in the digital space where it's really open to everyone and we're radically flattening hierarchies and we're connecting everyone to each other? The University of the People was started at this time, still exists today as a free, not completely accredited, but free university that's open to everyone. All over the world. So it was a very heady time. That's Jim Groom. Who knows who Jim Groom is? Whoa, okay. So Jim Groom coined the term edupunk. And he was a pioneer in sort of the creation of open learning resources and people owning their own domain names and creating their own websites. And he had a radio station and a lot of open learning experiments. So like proto-MOOC, where it was like, there's learning going on, you can have online forums and discussion groups. And he really pioneered a lot of the ways that people interact on the web, especially outside of commercial platforms, especially in the learning world. So this was my description of OpenCourseWare in 2013 in an article for Slate. The OpenCourseWare movement commenced when MIT began putting bare-bones versions of its courses online, free to all, in 2001. The first generation of these materials were snoozers, consisting of little more than reading lists, problem sets, and occasional 45-minute lecture videos filmed C-SPAN style from the back of a dimly lit lecture hall. Nevertheless, they drew millions of visitors, and with crucial backing from the Hewlett Foundation and others, a global open courseware consortium took shape, comprising hundreds of institutions worldwide that shared and published open textbooks and other resources. YouTube and broadband, so mobile, video, broadband, inaugurated the era of OCW 2.0. In the fall of 2011, free online courses in artificial intelligence and machine learning taught by Stanford University professors drew more than 100,000 signups each, and the term MOOC entered the popular lexicon. Today, the major MOOC platforms are the nonprofit edX, Coursera, and Udacity. That was 2013, real-time capsule. So let's take stock, shall we? That's kind of what people thought. People thought universities might go out of business because of OpenCourseWare. And people thought that free and open learning would meant that everyone everywhere can access learning, meaning that expertise potentially would be in the hands of the masses. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What did we never see coming? And what's next? Here's some couple things that we got right. It made a really big difference. Taking the masterworks of the greatest professors, the greatest experts on every topic, and making them available really changed. It just makes a difference. It means that there is this openness and this capacity. And I have to say that allowing people to interact with things on video became the biggest open learning affordance that was ever invented. I think another thing that we got right was that people grew up knowing that this just existed and just assuming that anything they wanted to learn, they could learn. And that should not be taken for granted. The fact that they can take it for granted is enormous. And I think that it just needs to be taken in a little bit, because we do have people, you run across people all the time who have incredible deep expertise on things that they taught themselves. And it's not like there weren't autodidacts before, but the level of the barrier to that has been lowered, and I think that's pretty major. There are people who have found alternative paths. We called out the example of a guy who made himself into a Google engineer in 6 months. They're not as common as we might have hoped that they would be, but there certainly are people that are able to construct those kinds of paths for themselves. And the real like basic bread and butter level of learning on the internet is just like incredibly healthy and thriving. How-to has always been one of the top 10 Google searches, and this is the how-to, page on YouTube, and it shows sort of like what people want, right? What do people want to learn? Technical things, technological things, very basic artistic things, how to make pancakes. I like that one. So that's some ideas of stuff we got right. I would prompt you guys to think about stuff that you think that we got right, if you remember that era a decade and a half ago of open learning. What was absolutely forecast correctly. And please put it in if you got Slido. We're taking questions this whole time. We're taking questions in the transition. I'm welcome interaction. It's weird how stubborn the lecture has been, by the way, this whole format. Kind of strange. So things that we got wrong. Accreditation, right? The idea that you still need a degree, you need to put together a certain number of credits and get that degree. People thought that once the knowledge was free and open, there were people that thought that it would become kind of a formality and kind of unimportant to actually get a degree. And and there were people like Peter Thiel, right, started a fellowship where he basically paid people $100,000 to drop out of fancy colleges and come do something with him, live in a hacker house in Stanford and Palo Alto, and kind of prove that you could become a billionaire without ever going to college. But that turned out to be kind of a dead end of an idea. And I think that kind of follows from the second point, which is that Clayton Christensen, another kind of forgotten name, who started this idea of disruptive innovation, he used to be famous for predicting that half of all universities will be gone in 15 years. The date of that prediction kept moving farther and farther out. Most universities are still not gone. Universities started in Bologna in the year 1000, and they just tend to be pretty stubborn institutions. They're hard to get rid of. Other things that we got wrong, there were these ideas about micro-credentials so that you would get, that it would be very valuable to have the proof that you'd taken one particular course or a series of courses, smaller than a degree, more useful than a degree. The problem with credentialing in this manner is that it works in very specific circles. So credentialing is a very social thing, and people always compare these things to like Girl Scout badges or Boy Scout badges, like, oh, you'll get a badge and it will show. The thing is, you need the Girl Scouts for the badge. Like the Girl Scouts the badge doesn't mean anything without the whole social structure and people knowing what it is and knowing what the achievement is and what it means and unlocking it. So the idea that there is going to be credentials that kind of walk around by themselves without big institutions attached to them just didn't really ever take off. And then I think probably one of the most important things that we got wrong collectively, and Krishna alluded to this in his introduction, is the idea that by making things free and making them accessible globally, that we would achieve equity or that we would flatten hierarchies, that we would open up doors. And the reasons why this didn't happen in the way that it was expected, I mean, it happened in some ways, right? There's always been sort of this, I think it was Thomas Friedman talked about, the world is flat, but it's spiky. Like there are those people in every country in the world, in every background in the world, there are those people who are those self-learners, they are that motivated, they are that supported by their home communities, and they're able to take essentially content and manufacture for themselves learning and achievement. But it doesn't work for the mass of anyone because learning is this deeply human social process. And without the social structures for inclusion and for reaching people who learn in different ways and for openly saying to people, we belong here, you belong here, it just doesn't work. And then I think probably, maybe some of the more disappointing points for some people. So, open courseware started with this idea of open licensing and talking about things like Wikipedia and different ways where people could own their own domains outside of big commercial platforms. That version of the web has been so buried, right? And the way that we interact with the web has become so commercially enclosed. And so many people spend so much of their time on these platforms that are owned and run by billionaires, and it really changes people's experiences of the web. So that has been, I think, one of the most disappointing aspects of how what was once OpenCourseware has evolved. And then this idea about AI, I don't know how invested people are in AI or the future of AI. It always feels like the future of AI is just around the corner. But it was thought of maybe 10 years ago that AI would have a significant impact on learning and teaching, and it doesn't seem like it's happened so much, although that's a debatable proposition, I would say. So this is a visual expression of some things that we got wrong about OpenCourseware. This is a paper that appeared by Justin Reich, who's at MIT, in the journal Science, about the way that participation in open learning plummets and tends to plummet cohort after cohort from the initial registration through to the completion. And this might have something to do with accreditation, it might have something to do with learner motivation, or really what the purpose of courseware is, but I think it's worth kind of thinking about and contemplating when we think about why are these resources existing, what are they being used for, and does it even make sense to compare them to sort of a linear path to a degree? It's sort of a persistent irritant when we talk about the transition to open. So maybe let's talk for a moment about stuff that we never saw coming. So in the launch of OpenCourseware, the democratization, the openness of scholarship and knowledge creation and collaborative content creation, when the world went crazy in 2020, everybody who had, I would say, a Twitter account had the ability to witness in real time knowledge being constructed. We saw debates happening, we saw preprints getting published online, people kind of open sourcing, right? Started with the genome of the virus being open sourced within a couple of weeks, right, of being sequenced, kind of the first time that ever happened. And people, this led to obviously enormous fissures and enormous debates, and there was a lot of misinformation, disinformation, false experts, people misrepresenting their expertise. But also, I think, obviously one of the greatest scientific achievements in history of the emergence of so many vaccines so quickly, and just a really bracing and important public discussion that everyone was invited to about how to handle this epochal century challenge as a human species. Some people talk, I remember probably one of my friends, I don't know who they quoted, saying, like, coronavirus is the world's first group project. Everybody was involved. Everybody had something to do. Another kind of example of this, of how open source knowledge production is working, is during the war in Ukraine, where there is an unprecedented level of civilians and ordinary people, ordinary folks, examining open drone footage that anybody can see and using it to track troop movements. There's a dialogue going back and forth between the ordinary citizens and the Ukraine military to verify the types of things that they're seeing, to understand things about supply chains, and sometimes it's saving lives. So it's really fascinating. Did we not see the weaponization of misinformation and disinformation? People saw it, but the people who talked so rapturously about the death of expertise and how anybody can get involved and be part of the conversation and get the equivalent of MIT PhD for free didn't really think about all the people that what would they do with that fake PhD or that PhD that they got for free, right? Well, Dr. Google and all the people who are like, I was an epidemiologist last week and now I'm a foreign policy expert. How do we handle the amount of people who disbelieve in science so strongly that they're willing to not get a life-saving vaccine? And this is unique to our country, it seems, in many ways, that we have this percentage of people that are so fundamentally convinced of something that's not true that they don't want to save their own lives. And then obviously we didn't, during the heady days of the 2008, 2010, people involved in the post-financial crisis and this kind of coming of Web 2.0, we didn't do enough to stop inequality. We still have a lot of billionaires. We have billionaires owning our means of communication. That doesn't seem like such a great thing, especially if you like the idea of an open and free web where anybody can say anything they want in a way that is actually collaborative. Is what we want, is everyone saying everything they want? Probably not, but how do we decide who gets to say what? That's probably the key point. So here we are, we're in this crazy, unprecedented moment, and I want to invite you all to think about, with each other, in conversation, about the image that you had of OpenCourseWare when you came in here, the ideas that I presented, anything else that you can think of about that we got right, that we got wrong, and this question, what the promise was, which is that openness could democratize education, democratize scholarship, democratize learning itself, that it can continue to be vibrant, that it can continue to represent the latest knowledge, that it can include more people in a more successful way to help them achieve their goals. Is that still what we want? And if so, how do we get there? And that is the ask is that you turn to each other and talk about it. I'm also going to take questions up here. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to invite our panel to come up and sit as well. Please talk amongst yourselves. Maybe I'll stand up because it feels kind of tight.
Yeah. I need a mic to do the intro to the panel.
Oh, yeah, he's just nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you.
Should I start?
Should we start the panel, or do you want to have a question for Anya?
There are a few questions that have come in.
Yeah, let's do it.
Go ahead.
The most popular There we go. The most popular, the most upvoted question that has come in from our Slido. I think we've got a lot of graduate students who are watching. They say, what's the best way for graduate students to get involved in creating material for OCW? There's a lot of excitement there.
That sounds like a you question, Krishna.
That might be a panel question.
Yeah.
Do you have questions for Anya?
Oh, questions for Anya specifically.
We'll take that one when we get to the panel.
Yeah. There are some reflections that are basically, adding to what we got wrong, what we got right, what we got wrong in a big way, that on-campus students would use open resources more than, and that big lectures would go away. Right? Yeah.
Do you want to take anything, or shall I introduce the panel?
No, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So let me use this mic. So Anya and I are now joined by 4 panelists, and we will be a panel of 6, which Anya will moderate. But I will start by introducing our 4 fellow panelists. And each of my 4 colleagues here will start things off by speaking very briefly, and then we'll jump into the panel, which Anya will lead. So Paige Dote, sitting right next to me here, is a second-year undergrad majoring in math. She sought out opportunities to contribute to OCW very early in her time at MIT, and those contributions so far, and I emphasize so far, have included notes for 2 courses that she prepared, and all the materials for a course that she taught this past IAP. Next, Sarah Hansen, Dr. Sarah Hansen, 3 over from me, from the OCW team, one of the people whose photograph was on that slide. She is the Senior Manager for OCW Educator and Strategic Initiatives. So she leads OCW Educator, which Kurt spoke about. She hosts and co-produces the Chalk Radio podcast. And she's leading OCW's work building collaborations across the broader OER ecosystem. Next, let me introduce Dr. Anjali Shastri. She is a senior lecturer, MIT Sloan. She's also the senior strategist for the MIT Abdul Latif Jameel World Education Laboratory. Her grounding in systems dynamics and organizational thinking informs her fieldwork in sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and elsewhere on business models and organizational design to meet the needs of the underserved. She has published 4 courses on OCW and is a member of its faculty advisory committee. Last, but far from least, Nancy Canwisher. Nancy is the Walter A. Rosenblith Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience here at MIT in Course 9. Like Anjali, she's a member of the faculty advisory committee. She was one of the 47 names you saw up on a slide in Kurt's presentation, so she is one of the 47 instructors with more than 10 courses on OCW. One of them is 913, The Human Brain. And the video of lecture number 1 of this course, which is a remarkable video, it went viral on YouTube in December, and very, very close to a round number, but as of, I just checked, 9.95 million views on OCW. Round number.
Everyone click so we can get there.
round number coming very soon. So Nancy, Sarah, Anjali, and Paige, thank you very much for joining us, and I'll now hand it back to Anya, who will moderate the panel.
Sure. Yeah, hi, sorry.
Sorry.
Yes.
It's fine.
I misspoke. Each of you has brief opening remarks,
Yes.
and then Anya will moderate the panel.
Yes. My moderation is that you should each give brief opening remarks.
As Sanjay and Anya said earlier, I definitely think that this generation is taking advantage of the educational resources out there, and I should know as one of them. From a low-income household, I started taking advantage of Khan Academy and Professor Leonard's videos and Crash Course, and it really allowed me to jumpstart my education and feel comfortable taking use of things like this, which is why when it came time to choose where to go to undergraduate, I decided to come to MIT for MIT OCW. And reaching out and using these resources also encouraged me to reach out to my advisor, Professor Haynes Miller, to talk to OCW and get connected, and I've been working with them ever since, from helping structure in 1803 differential equations to teaching a course and trying to create resources for that and figuring out all these different logistical questions that I think are really interesting and I think need to be streamlined as time progresses to help encourage other students like myself.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
I was just reflecting, because we saw that screenshot where Sarah's interviewing me, on how it's such a gift to be able to reflect on your teaching in this way. So preparing instructor versions gets you really reflecting on what's your philosophy, the questions you ask are really great. They're questions that every faculty who might want to use your materials may need the answer to, but they also prompt us to reflect. And I was just thinking about how now the same vibe is informing how you use and look at and interact with your own teaching materials to teach yourself and teach others. It's amazing. We have so many more options. When I was a freshman here, I joined ESG, the Experimental Studies Group, which is a different way to learn and very counterculture at the time. And now I'm rejoicing in the fact that we have all these other ways to be counterculture or pro-culture, but to kind of pull together what you're learning, even as a student, even as an instructor. I find myself reflecting on what can we build on top of this. I'm sure everyone here in the room has thought about that a bit too. I would love to dig into that a bit. What comes on top of, what do we pull out from this? Not just business model-wise, but I don't know, what are other ways to guide people through learning journeys or invite them in?
Thank you. Just get a little closer here. Yeah, the reason I get up in the morning is to try to make OCW more useful to educators, both at MIT but also globally. And by far the best part of my job is interviewing faculty, lecturers. It's just so enriching, and I feel like I'm now the best cocktail party guest because I know a little bit about everything, like brain science and business, and so it's really fun. And what I'm trying to do is engage faculty in open, reflective pedagogy. So how can we not only openly license content, but how can we also pull back the curtain on how we teach? How can we share that information to help everybody think about teaching in new ways? And how can we encourage not only MIT faculty to do that, but faculty around the world so that we can learn from them?
Hi. Well, I'm nearly a lifer at MIT. I don't have the full credentials because I was away for a few years, but I was an undergrad, a grad student, a postdoc here, and I've been on the faculty for, let's not even say, but over a couple of decades. And I love this place. And what I really most love about MIT is that, you know, it's a very fancy elite place, but it is so non-elitist in the sense that it has always been about welcoming everybody. And you see this in so many ways. You see it from the large percent of the undergrad body, I forget the exact number, but it's a pretty impressive number of students who are first-gen college students. Like, you don't see that at Harvard or Stanford or other places, but it's something I'm very proud of at MIT. You see it from the recent announcement that MIT is taking its profits from the recent boom to make tuition free to all undergrads whose parents make less than some pretty reasonable amount. So good for MIT. But you see it quintessentially in OCW. And I just think OCW is like the essence of MIT, offering what it has to the world. And my particular experience with it has just been so fun because for a long time I tried to do all these more structured things where, you know, I was told you have to take your lectures and break them into these 5-minute chunks and interleave questions, and you have to have these teaching goals. I don't know, I don't have teaching goals. My teaching goals are to blow people's mind. You know, that's it. Just blow people's mind, that's it. And so I could never really fit into the kind of more structured kind of online teaching formats. And so I was just thrilled when I learned from OCW. I was like, I can take my lectures. It's like an hour and a half. There's no break. It's just an arc. That's what I do. I tell a story over an hour and a half. And I can just put that on the web, and that's cool. So it's great.
Thank you all. And I'll just say, so Kurt, there are several hundred people out there on the live stream. So Kurt's going to channel questions from there at an appropriate time, but Anya, it's yours.
Great. Yeah, wow. So we're seeing this cross-section of the university and both people inside and outside and how it's affected you all. When the pandemic struck, people who had been thinking about digital pedagogy and open learning were all of a sudden the experts, and everybody wanted to hear how you did it. And I wonder, now we're on the other end of 2 years of real remote learning fatigue, and I'd love to hear from the faculty members, but also from you, Paige, about where does open learning fit in a world where people are so eager to reclaim the in-person experience?
I think that's a really interesting question, mostly because my first year here was completely remote. And so I know numerous students who, when taking a course, they had Zoom recordings to watch things afterwards and all these different assignments that were made more open and available. And it just seemed like we were more connected with each other. And now that we're moving away from that and going back to it in person, well, been in person for about a year now, people still using those resources, people asking for lectures from last year because they're still relevant. And I think if anything, this has shown us how valuable it is to be creating these resources and to maintain them and to save them somewhere, whether that be through OCW if you feel comfortable with it, or at the very least for your future renditions of a course. And more resources, I think, is certainly a great thing.
Yeah. I'll jump in with one comment. The thing I really noticed in switching to online teaching was I could get different modes of participation from students. So I teach in a business school where, you know, you raise your hand, you make your comment, you score your class participation points, and there's often a lot of jockeying for getting those points in. But I just really appreciated how when we were online, I could warm call someone, I could give them everyone a second to think, and not break up the momentum as much, so have more sort of interleaving and more ability to get folks who thought differently or raise their points differently. And then I also saw this amazing blossoming of support for each other, where one student, I mean, maybe they're second up to me, but they would say, you know, that was a great point, Jose, let me add. And it was really cool to see it like in the chat unfolding. So can we bring some of those things back into life? Can we make room for people who maybe need a moment to think before they raise their hand? And we have methods for this, of course, that we've had for a while, but I think there's more to glean out of that. I also think, like everyone, I'm sure in the room thinks about this too, we've got to have a really strong reason to be in the room together. And it's a gift we'd better be prepared to make the most of.
I think of the phrase, the magic of MIT. And I think we lost it for a year. And so, well, what is the magic? And it's why is it valuable to be in the room together, interacting and engaging, either the two of us or students together with students, students together with instructors. And so I think the trick going forward is we have all these resources which can help people to learn on their own time. How do we blend the learning that our students will do on their own time with the engagement and then the interaction that's actually the magic, and that's why we all come here.
I'll just add that my field has a little bit to say about the magic of being there. So I studied the organization of the human brain, and one of the things you see if you look at the cortex, there's all these special bits that do different things. And if you look at cortical territory, you see that a very large part of the whole cortex, the part that we think and reason with, is allocated to interacting with other people, recognizing their faces, hearing their voices, understanding speech and language, thinking about what they're thinking, all this stuff. And so we are social primates. We are made to interact with each other, and most of that machinery is designed to enable us to interact one-on-one. And we manage with all these other modes, but the more we differ from that physical presence thing, the harder it is. So I think that's part of the magic. But I do just want to underline what you said, is that, you know, there are clear upsides of remote teaching. And my favorite is the very humble thing of the chat.
Yeah.
Like when I first was teaching remotely, I just loved that all of these students who are pretty shy and don't usually raise their hand and ask a question felt totally comfortable typing it into the chat. And that's a really valuable thing we shouldn't lose.
Is Zoom fatigue supported by brain science?
I don't know if brain science has much to say about it, but I think it's just part of this thing that we are, you know, we're wired up to be around each other, and it's, you know, we can manage in these other ways for a while, but we really, that's our native format.
Makes sense, yeah.
I just wanted to add one thing. I think when everyone was online initially, and that was the only choice, one thing that brought to light was the whole selves of students. Suddenly we realized that they were caretakers, parents. In some cases, they had multiple jobs in some cases. And so I think there's always going to be a place for these online versions or storing knowledge where students can access them asynchronously, because if we're thinking about equity, we need to create multiple pathways to getting toward the learning objectives. And we can no longer assume that everyone can make it to the lecture at 9 a.m. and be successful.
Question?
Yes.
So I'm going to channel a couple of questions that people have submitted online along these lines about what about what you've talked about, this sort of chat or collaborative energy that's so key to the learning experience. Given where we're starting from with OCW as here's the learning materials, we've been brainstorming a bit about ways to, you know, to add a little bit more of that and help people kind of connect with each other or get in on the conversation. What, you know, what's an idea? What's a vision for how OCW might be able to bring some of that in?
Do you guys know about Study Talk? So during the pandemic, there grew up this sort of ecosystem of different kinds of social engagement where people sort of were creating parasocial environments for themselves to study, either with their classmates or with anyone else. And so Study Talk was like literally people live streaming on TikTok while they were studying. And people did this on Twitter, they did it on Discord. They, you know, sometimes they were studying for specific things, like specific standardized tests that lots of people would take, or if there's, you know, nationwide tests that people take sometimes for colleges, to go into college, depending on the like European countries. But this whole idea that you really do need to have that virtual space, and you need to have that interaction and live, and with social media, you can have it anywhere, anytime, with anyone else who wants to have it with you. One of the more wholesome areas of TikTok, I would say.
Watch parties kind of thing for videos. I don't know if people have experimented with that. Do you know, Kurt? Like where you chat?
I can comment on this. I mean, not quite to the same extent of watch parties, but I fully know graduate students here who have taken lectures that they're being recorded on Zoom, finding a classroom for themselves and watching it together, because it's just so much more enjoyable to have someone next to you and feel like you're not the only one struggling or taking in the information. So this idea of a watch party or a common chat or something like that is certainly worthwhile.
You know, this also became evident in during the pandemic when for large classes that were taught on Zoom, you might think, well, it doesn't matter if it's synchronous or not. Like, you might ask a question, but most people don't ask questions, and so what difference does it make if you watch it synchronous or not? But there were some polls done in some of the large classes here, and it makes a very big difference. There was a huge preference for live synchronous lectures over asynchronous ones.
You know, in the fandoms of some TV shows, people will decide that they're going to watch a certain episode, like from the back seasons, and they'll all watch it and be together on Twitter, kind of like live watching it. So that's also an expression of that really deep need, I think. Is there another one, or?
I'd like to invite anybody in the audience here, if you have a question, if you'd like to ask.
Or an objection.
Or an objection.
While people are thinking, we should answer the one that you asked earlier and we didn't get to, which is how can grad students contribute?
Yeah.
There's many different ways. That was a question from online, or was it in the room?
It was online.
So we know there's a couple hundred people out there online. I don't know who you are necessarily can't see you, but one way is if you're a grad student who teaches, as Paige did this past IAP already as a sophomore, if you teach an MIT course and you're the instructor of the MIT course, as was the case for Paige in this IAP, you can come to OCW and OCW can share the materials from your course if that's the situation that you're in. Another different mode of helping is helping to prod your faculty member who's teaching a course that you would love to see on OCW and say, how can I help you get your materials to OCW? Connect with Kurt, connect with the team, and we will help you to help in that way, in a way that's constructive.
Great idea.
And not only that, like help offer to make resources if you happen to have the time. One of the things I typed up for the course on real analysis was some recitation notes. And these prove very helpful, whether it be for review for an exam or some homework problem that everyone struggled on. Anything that you can record or keep track of proves really helpful if you can save it somewhere.
And also, we don't just do faculty interviews. We also love to interview students, graduate students, teaching assistants to get their insights in how they're experiencing teaching and learning. So that's also an option.
Back to you, Uda.
Yeah, I mean, one of my observations in following the emergence of this movement is that OpenCourseWare and similar projects have created a space for really thinking carefully about pedagogy in a way that universities don't make formal space for very often. And but I think the corollary to that is, like, over the last decade and a half, that space hasn't necessarily grown as much as people might have liked. And I would invite you as the faculty members to respond to this idea that, do you feel like you're part of an exclusive club of people who really care about university teaching, or do you think that that concern and that interest has grown?
It's a really good question.
I see among my colleagues just, some of the most brilliant scientists I know in my department, my friends, my colleagues, they all care a lot about teaching, right? So it may have grown, but I think in some pockets at least, there's a very, deep interest in doing the best possible job and in teaching. And I think a lot of them don't yet realize that they can do that not just in their little MIT class, but to go beyond. So I've been nudging my colleagues.
And do you feel that you and your colleagues have the support that they need to grow as teachers? Is that recognized? Is it rewarded? Is it given time?
I would say for my little window in my bubble over across the street, and yeah, somewhat. I mean, there's always the problem that at least MIT faculty are mostly doing research, and we care about teaching, but it's it's a relatively small subset of what we do, and so it's just a matter of trying to find the time to work on the teaching as well.
I would say that one of the crown jewels of MIT in this space is the Teaching and Learning Lab. Janet Rankin leads it. I don't see Janet here. Maybe she's on the live stream for all I know. And many faculty have discovered the ways in which she and her team can help. What I actually want, that's in response to, but I also wanted to say, I think that for me, there are a whole variety of rewards that you get for teaching well at MIT. But the things that are of most value are the ways when you realize that you've gained the appreciation of your students for it. So there's a certain set of awards which are entirely student nominated and student decided, and when you win one of those, it is the best thing. And also your peers as fellow educators. For me, I came here, we arrived at MIT at roughly the same time. We've decided not to say when we arrived. But the older generation of faculty, you get to know them. They're your new colleagues, your new friends. You see that they're teaching really, really well, and so you want to do the same thing. And then you try to pass it on to the next generation. But all of that said, I think that during the pandemic, in particular the first 6 months, sort of from March of 2020, that first 6 months, I think there was more thought across MIT about how to teach than there ever has been in my 25 years at MIT, because nobody could do it the way they did it last year. And in normal times, there's a small fraction of people who are doing something in a new way and thinking, how do I do this? And then there's a large fraction who maybe did that a couple of years ago, but now they're doing it the same way they did it before. But when the pandemic hit, every single person who was part of the teaching enterprise couldn't do it the way they did it before. And there was much more focus, energy, thought on what are our learning goals for our students? How do we help them to learn what we want to see them learning? And I think that energy and creativity and thought will bear fruit in the long run.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I would say that was an international phenomenon. It happened in K-12 and in higher ed, but it was, it was so shadowed by this trauma and this emergency, but there is that germ of hope that it could lead to something really big.
Precisely.
Yeah, or are we going to say, oh, phew, that's over, now we can get back? And in my school, we started having a 1-hour meeting every Friday morning, all faculty, all staff on teaching. That never happened. That was pretty cool. But we also, after a year, you're like, oh, it's Friday morning again. So you need to kind of pick the right cadence and the right depth. I do think we probably need more levels of conversations, not only specific courses or specific tools, but overall design. I don't know that we had a chance for all that. We're very concerned on the mechanics, I think. So I think there's more to be done.
Okay. Kurt, did you have a question?
I'm just going to say, we're getting some really great questions in the chat here. We are running out of time, but I think we'll probably do like a blog post on the OCW site to address some of these great questions. So.
Thank you. Before I close, Anya, did you want to either last questions or last words, and then I'll close, and we have a reception waiting for us, but you can go second to last.
Oh, yeah. Well, thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to those who are online, and thanks for this moment of reflection. It's been super valuable for me, and thanks for having me.
So I'd like to thank the Open Learning team who made the event possible. If Emma's still here, thank you, Emma. Of the OCW team, I already thanked. Thank you again. I see Sanjay in the back. He thanks Sanjay on behalf of his entire team. But most of all, I'd like to thank the panelists and to thank Anya. Thank you so much for joining us to help us celebrate the first 20 years of OCW and launch us into its third decade, going strong and next generation platform underneath our feet. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts, and we look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you very much.